into land, and land into one of the busiest airports in the world. A gateway for dreamers, a runway for believers. But now, our world is not quite the same. We are in the toughest crisis of our generation. Our skies are quieter, and our streets too. But it's also in this quiet that you can hear the belief, and in the emptiness, see the resolve and resilience of our people. And just like once upon a time, we now look not at what we see, but at who we are, and not at what if, but what's next. A people who stare impossible challenges in the face and say no, we won't be beaten. Planes can be grounded, but our spirit, never. Dear world, together, we will rise again.
Hello everyone, I'm Joanna, and on behalf of the Singapore Global Network, I would like to thank everyone for joining us at our inaugural episode of the Finance Venture series. This event is proudly brought to you by the Singapore Global Network, Monetary Authority of Singapore, DBS Group, and Singapore Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong. This evening, we are expecting over 2,700 members of our global community from over 15 different locations joining us. About 700 of them have also gathered in Shanghai and Melbourne together for our very special networking dinner session. This is our very first ever hybrid event and a super good manifestation of what we try to achieve at the Singapore Global Network. Our aim is to grow a global community of overseas Singaporeans and friends and helping the community connect with one another and stay updated with what's happening in Singapore, be it whether it's the latest news, industry developments, or opportunities. Today, we are very honored to have with us Mr. Piyush Gupta, Chief Executive Officer of DBS Group, and Mr. Tan Yong-Wah, Chief Information Officer at the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. They especially took time for today's event and have prepared a wealth of insights and thought to share with all of us later. We would like to encourage everyone to post your questions to our speakers via the Q&A function located on the Zoom tab. We will try to address them later, as well as the earlier submitted questions that we have received to the best of our ability. I know everyone is excited to hear from our speakers, so let me now hand over the time to Yong-Wah. Yong-Wah, please.
Thank you very much. Fellow Singaporeans and friends, both overseas and in Singapore, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It depends on where you are. Welcome to this new normal hybrid seminar webinar Finance Venture series organized by the Singapore Global Network. My name is Tan Yong-Wah, a Singaporean based in Hong Kong for more than 25 years, and I'm this event's host speaker and moderator. We have today the honor with us Mr. Piyush Gupta, CEO for DBS, as our guest speaker. The format of this event, scheduled to be around 1 hour, will be divided into 3 parts. First is the opening, and Mr. Gupta will give an insight of developments in the banking and finance, some thoughts on Singapore future direction. Second part will be a dialogue session between Mr. Gupta and myself. Third will be question and answer to Mr. Gupta and myself, if any. Singapore Global Network has kindly collected some questions during the registration process. And during this event, if you have questions, please type and submit online. I understand that this event is attended by more than 700 physical participants in Shanghai and Melbourne. And at the moment, I think more than 462 virtual participants on Zoom. Therefore, the Q&A may not be able to handle all questions raised. So please accept our sincere apology if we do not have sufficient time to address your question. So before we move into the event, on behalf of the Singapore Global Network, the organizer, I would like to thank all supporters listed in the brochures. Now, first, let me just touch on the background. Now, for the past 4 decades, There were many financial crises, and each time will be the opportunity window for wealth redistribution. Remember October 19, 1987, the US stock crash, leading to Hong Kong stock market shut down for 3 days. 1997, 1998 Asian financial crisis due to the currency pair mismatch and the currency attack starting from Thailand. 2000 dot-com bubble burst, leading to decade rebounds double blow effect. 2008, 2009 US subprime housing loan issue, causing a few investment banks collapse and belly up. However, last year, the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic is no doubt the crisis of our generation not just affected financial market, but all sectors. Let us look at our friend Mr. Andrew Sheng, his recent YouTube program. Let me quote. He said, "We can no longer using 19th and 20th centuries glasses to look at the 21st century's problem, as the world has become from complicated to complex," unquote. Essentially, the Federal Reserve quantitative easing, or in layman terms, printing more US money during the 2008-2009 crisis, as well as last year COVID-19 pandemic, has changed the entire financial landscape. With the above backdrop, perhaps I would like to invite our guest speaker, Piyush Gupta, CEO of DBS, to share his view on the impact of COVID-19 Singapore and regional perspective, as well as any opportunity arising in the new economy. The floor is yours, Piyush.
Unmute. All right, thanks, Yong-Wah. And please feel free to call me Piyush. Very few people call me Mr. Gupta. It's a real pleasure to be on the program, and let me echo Yong-Wah's welcome to all fellow Singaporeans from all of these cities around the world. I thought I would dive straight into my comments, so we have some time later for a dialogue and Q&A. And I really thought I would make 3 broad points in my introductory comments. The first point is simply this, that the secular conditions that inform and catalyze Asia's growth over the last 10, 15 years are still very much in place. And therefore, pandemic notwithstanding, geopolitics notwithstanding, I am of the firm belief that you will continue to see an Asian century. Why do I say that? It's because the secular fundamentals of Asia are actually quite consistent. Number one, demographic dividend. It's a young population, which means consumption demand continues to go apace. It's true that at the margin, some of the countries like India and Indonesia might have job problems, employment problems. But overall, a youthful and growing population across Asia continues to drive this massive consumption boom. And you can see that in the pasars and in the department stores and in the streets of every country and every city in Asia. By the way, it's not just consumption. This demographic is also leading to a massive creation of wealth. And even today, there is more wealth being created in our part of the world than anywhere else. Interestingly, this wealth is being supplemented with a lot more new money coming into Asia from all over the place. Obviously, in our part of the world, money comes in from North Asia and the region. But we're increasingly seeing money come in from the West, including now from the US. It's instructive to note that in 2017, there were 7 family offices in Singapore. At the end of last year, that number had gone up to a total of 220 family offices. So that's a growth of some 20 times, all in the course of 2-3 years. So there's clearly consumption and wealth. The second big thing, the driver of secular growth, is investment. By and large, other than China, which has obviously done a large part of the investment, most countries in Asia are very early in the investment cycle, infrastructure build in particular, and urbanization support in specific. And you're seeing that agenda, whether it's Vietnam, whether it's Indonesia, whether it's Thailand, whether it's the Philippines, that infrastructure spend will continue to drive a lot of growth in the region. I don't think that's going away anytime soon. A third big driver of Asia's secular growth is the integration of Asia. There used to be a joke that essentially all the money, capital from Asia went to the West and then came back to Asia through roundabout ways. But if you look at capital flows and obviously trade flows, intra-Asia flows continue to grow. And even through this entire period, the last 2-3 years, the global trade has been slowing. And the last year, intra-Asia trade and intra-Asia capital flows have continued to be quite robust. So people sometimes say Asia grows at night when the government sleep because we don't have a Brussels. But notwithstanding the absence of Brussels, Asia is coming together. And last is the digital transformation. Partly because of the demographics, younger population, we just have a lot more digital natives in Asia. And therefore, you see the transformation in industry after industry. My own industry, financial services, but every other industry, you're seeing Asia at the cutting edge of a change in people behavior, a change in the underlying ways of doing work. So these secular changes, I think, will continue to drive a growth in Asia. And by the way, this is broad-based. People question the future and relevance of Hong Kong. I'm not in that camp. I do think that the creation of the Greater Bay Area as a megapolis is of immense consequence. And if you look at it in totality, the Guangdong province and in Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Macau, Hong Kong, it has got tremendous opportunity and tremendous legs. So I continue to believe that Hong Kong will have a meaningful role to play in this growing and booming Asia. I think Singapore continues to have a big role to play, even in the last year through the pandemic. If you look at the number of companies who've chosen to move into Asia, it's the tech companies like ByteDance or like Tencent. It is manufacturing companies. Hyundai is putting together a plant for electronic vehicles in Asia. Just yesterday, BioNTech announced that they're going to put a vaccine facility into Singapore. So all of these show that Singapore continues to be relevant for many different kinds of companies. So the broad-based secular theme that I say applies to Asia in general also applies to Singapore. Now, the one caveat, obviously, there's some sectors which will suffer more because of the pandemic. So tourism, hospitality, etc., will take a little bit longer to get back to speed. But in many ways, the other sectors which are continuing to do well will be able to carry a relatively larger part of the burden. And I think they have the capacity to do. So that was my first point. Don't count Asia out. Asia's secular future is still fairly robust. My second point was this, that there are really three fundamental big things that the last 12, 18 months have caused to happen. Some people call this a pivotal shift, and my own mind is more an acceleration than a shift. The first is the idea of hyper-digitalization. It's quite clear that in the course of the last 12, 18 months, more digital transformation happened than it happened in 5, 10 years before that, and principally in the area of digital consumption. People obviously took to e-commerce even faster, so people are ordering everything online. But you think about some industries which are not traditionally seen to be easy to transform. Education is one. EdTech really took off last year, with people all having to study and learn from home. It was not just the people who had, couldn't go to universities in the US. At every level, the PSLE tuition space in Singapore, the professional education space, the K-12 space, everybody digitized and people learned to consume education digitally. Healthcare was another. So the idea of telehealth has been in existence for a period of time, but the take-up of telehealth last year has been quite dramatic. People's willingness to do tele-appointments and teleconsultations has been huge. And these tell me that the change in people's thinking is actually quite fundamental and profound. I saw the biggest example of this in our own industry. Obviously, a lot of people have been moving to mobile banking and digital banking over the years, but we always had people who found it harder to make the transition. So the older generations, for example, people over 60, tended to find it harder to move. Similarly, less well-educated people, so migrant labor in Singapore, for example, or domestic help, or even people in the heartland. Well, guess what? In the course of last year, the biggest take-up of digital consumption of financial services came from all of these groups. So the people who were 60 went up by 4x in terms of the willingness to use mobile banking last year. Right in the middle of the pandemic, when we had to take all of the foreign workers and put them into dormitories, we were able to open digital accounts for 60,000 workers over one weekend. And thousands of them are now being able to transfer money back to Indonesia, Bangladesh, and their home on our DigiBank app without actually having to go to the shop or to the money transfer office. So it just shows that the consumption take-up of digital, the hyper-digitalization has been huge. In addition to consumption, the other change that has happened in the last year is the coming to age of essentially the blockchain world. It's not just crypto coins, it is the whole distributed ledger architecture. It has taken some time coming because the technology has existed for some time. But for a whole host of reasons, some of them not even to do with the pandemic, we have reached tipping point. And so all of the excitement that you see with the cryptos, Ethereum and Bitcoin, etc., is actually paralleled by more fundamental change. People are beginning to use both private permissioned blockchain arrangements and permissionless blockchain arrangements for a whole range of other activities that I can see the pace of this is continuing to pick up quite rapidly. And finally, in digital consumption, the other place where there's been a lot of change last year is not just in the consumer side, but in the institutional and SME side. More companies started reimagining their supply chains last year than I have seen in the past decade. So people are trying to digitize for greater transparency in the supply chain. They're trying to digitize for greater resiliency in the supply chain. They're trying to make sure that they reduce manual effort so people can work remotely and from home. And therefore, companies like ours with an API set of suites and products have found it very, very beneficial. We've done more business helping companies digitize the supply chains in the last 12 months than we have in a long period of time. So the first big change is this hyper-digitalization theme. The second big theme, which I think is a structural fundamental change, is of course the nature of work. We all know, and I don't need to emphasize the point, everybody's learned to work from home. Now, what that means is in an ironic way, even though people are talking about the end of globalization, I really think that this is going to actually drive an increase in globalization, particularly of the workforce. So when you can sit and work from your home, then what prevents you from sitting anywhere in the world and working from anywhere in the world? And I do think you're going to find that this distributed labor model will start actually gaining a lot more currency. In our own world, I can see today that I could have a team in Silicon Valley, I could have a team in Israel, and I could have a team in other parts of the world running labs and so on and doing stuff for us. Now, at the same time, I'm conscious of the fact I've been one of the first people to say I don't see the end of big office. I want my people to come back to office and spend at least 60% of the time, because I think all of these issues around culture, the soul of the company, ideation, innovation are all important. But I don't believe the answer is binary, either this or that. I do think you'll find a tremendous opportunity for people to be able to participate in workflows and value chains from remote locations. I think that's a fundamental change. And the third fundamental change I see happening is in the agenda around sustainability. Right at the beginning of the crisis, the question was raised about whether the focus on livelihoods and short-term economics would actually take the sustainability agenda off the front burner, push it to the back burner. My view all along was that that was unlikely to happen. And frankly, a year down the road, I think I've been proven right. A couple of things have happened. Number one, the pandemic has made it very clear to people that tail risks happen. You cannot wish away tail risks. And in the case of climate change or even biodiversity loss, it is not a tail risk. It's not a black swan event. It is a known risk. It's just a risk where the standard deviation of the likelihood of it happening in the short term is low. So people have been deferring the problem. The pandemic has focused people's minds on the fact that you cannot defer this problem endlessly. And so we must start trying to resolve it. So I think it's got a much greater degree of consciousness around the urgency to address this. But the second thing the pandemic has done is it's given us confidence and knowledge in the belief that when we have a gun to our heads, we can find the resources to handle challenges. If you look at the total of the fiscal resources which governments are putting to work to try and come out of the pandemic, and if you add, of course, the monetary policy stimulus that has been put into work, you're talking about 20, 25, 30 trillion dollars. That's 1/3 of global GDP. Now, if we could find that kind of resource base in a few short months, because the pandemic forced us to do that, then why would we not be able to find resources to be able to handle the sustainability crisis? And I think increasingly people are beginning to get their minds around that. Therefore, as you can see, whether it's the Biden administration or whether the European Build Back Better and so on, everybody is digging deep into the pockets to find the resources for a green recovery agenda, for a green recovery plan. So I think each of these three things, the hyper-digitalization agenda, the change in the nature of work agenda, and the renewed focus on the sustainability agenda. I talked about the environmental part of sustainability. Frankly, the S part of ESG, the society part of sustainability, has also got a massive fillip. I think there's going to be a tremendous focus on making sure we address the needs of the bottom of the pyramid and the frontline workers of society. So I think they're going to be major and important changes. So let me go back to the third part of my comments, which is really how do you react to that? I can see that in most countries, I talked about the European Green Recovery Plan, I talked about Joe Biden administration plan. But in most countries that we are involved in, it is quite clear that the governments are actively trying to help shape a different future. People call it build back better. Some people call it build forward better. But the notion that we can actually use this crisis as an opportunity to reposition ourselves, to reposition jobs, to reposition livelihood, that notion is very real. In Singapore, the government constituted something called the Emerging Stronger Task Force under the aegis of the Deputy Prime Minister. I was fortunate to be one of the 15 people on the task force. And we spent a lot of time really thinking about what should Singapore's future be coming out of the crisis. Those two big trends I talked about, those are obvious. One is digitalization. If the world digitizes a lot more, then what opportunities does that create for Singapore? And we believe it does create opportunities. The capacity for Singapore to start expanding digital services and products into a broader market. We are good at education. Can we spread education services into the region? We have great healthcare facilities. Can we take those and put those out to the region and so on? So that is one. The second is, as the world digitizes, you need a much better infrastructure capability. So you have the opportunity to be a digital hub, a digital infrastructure. So there are opportunities that we can figure and do that. The other is obviously sustainability theme. Does Singapore have the opportunity to not only create a green plan for ourselves, but also help catalyze the sustainability agenda for the rest of the region? I'm convinced sustainability is going to be $1 trillion business. So how does Singapore actually sit in the middle of that and try and create an opportunity around that? Those of you who were familiar with the green plan that we announced a little while ago, and there's elements of a city in nature, which is to plant more trees, sustainable living, which is to try to make the schools more carbon neutral, to have more public transport, an energy reset, to have cleaner buildings and clean energy in Singapore, and overall green economy. The various parts of the green plan, each of these parts of the green plan create new opportunities for people and citizens to build new businesses. At DBS, we've used the same opportunity. We actually set up a task force through last year to try and think about how we could shape the future very differently. And in doing that, we've also come up with a bunch of things that we've been driving, some of which are in the public domain, some are not. But in the last few months, we've announced a digital exchange, which allows us to do stuff like securities token offerings and crypto custody, etc. We've announced a new platform with JP Morgan and Temasek, which allows us to think about a new settlement mechanism using crypto for global clearing and settlement capabilities. We're going to announce something soon in the carbon space. So there are a bunch of different things that we have tried to do to be able to leverage this change in the paradigm and the opportunities that it brings to us. And I believe that those kinds of opportunities will be available to a lot of people. So I think the future is challenging in the short term, but I think the opportunities for growth are still there. And certainly for us in Singapore, for Singaporeans abroad, I would urge all of you to keep your eyes on the region, keep your eyes on the opportunities back home, because I do think that there will be distinctive new areas that you can address and try and have focus and build new businesses in. So why don't I stop there, Yong-Wah, and then maybe we can dive into the Q&A and dialogue session.
Okay, Piyush, thank you very much. It's very rich contents in your 15 to 20 minutes speech. Need to digest. But anyway, because of time, so I better start the dialogue session. Okay, I have only four simple questions for the dialogue. The number one is, many months ago when Professor Tan Yong-Wah came to Hong Kong, gave a talk, and he was talking about the possibility of decoupling between the China and the US. And he predicted that in time to come, maybe 5 to 10 years, when we Asians wake up in the morning, could see above our head, there are two suns. One is called the West Sun, which is US, and the other one is called the East Sun, which is China. So, under Biden's administration, I think more confrontation than collaboration, you can see very clear. So it's likely that Tan Yong-Wah's prediction is quite real and may come within a few years. So luckily in Asia, one positive development is the Regional Comprehensive Economics Partnership RCEP will be in operation beginning of 2022. So just could I ask you to share with the audience that how, when we look up the sun and look up the head, there are two suns, how Asian handle this situation To you, please.
So, Yong-Wah, first of all, you got to understand, if you look back at history over the last couple of millennia, you've often had situations with multipolar worlds. If you look through the 16th, 17th, 18th century, there was not just one dominant power. The British was a dominant sea power, but so were the Portuguese, so were the Spanish, so were the French, and so were the Dutch. And despite them, they were able to, despite they had the skirmishes at the edge, but overall, through the entire period and the Industrial Revolution, the 17th and 18th century, economies grew and the world prospered. So the idea that if you wind up having not just two, but potentially multiple suns, means that everything will come to a grinding halt, history hasn't borne that out. History suggests that people find ways around it. Now, and particularly in the context of US and China, I'm actually a little bit more sanguine and optimistic than other people, including Professor Tan Yong-Wah. First of all, I think the chances of outright war are limited. I think there might be skirmishes and proxy wars like you used to see in the past in Vietnam and Korea and so on. But I think the notion of MAD, the mutually assured destruction, which kept the US and Soviet Union from using nuclear weapons and large-scale wars through the Cold War, I think they're still very much in place. So I think it's highly unlikely you're going to see, outright war because of everybody understanding the downside consequences of that. I think you will see skirmishes, and I do think that you will see more cooperation and more confrontation than cooperation. Your points are correct. However, even in that context, I have a second view, which is, see, in the Cold War, it was very easy to create an iron curtain and to create a bloc, the Soviet bloc. And the reason for that is that the Soviet Union's participation in global economy was actually quite tiny. The Soviet Union was a major trading partner only for a handful of countries, and its overall contribution to global GDP was small. But that is no longer true today. Both the sets, US and China, have massive contributions to global GDP. And if you look at China, they're the number one trading partner for 70 or 80 countries. There is a high degree of porosity and interdependency today, far more than there ever was through the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. So in reality, the capacity to do an unbundle and to take these two systems apart is actually very, very hard. We did some work when people were talking about the unbundling of the supply chain, the technology supply chain. Our own assessment is to try and delink the supply chain, even Apple supply chain from China, is something that cannot be done easily in less than 10, 15 years. It is very complex to do, and there's an entire ecosystem of SMEs that would have to shift and move. And therefore, while a lot of companies are looking at creating resiliency, they're all looking at a China plus one. I'm talking about Western companies. They're looking at a China plus one strategy. Nobody's looking at a shift out of China. And even the plus one is not easy. The capacity you need to actually put in, whether it's in Vietnam or in Thailand or in Indonesia and India, none of the countries have the wherewithal and capacity to be able to create that kind of circumstance. So I think it's going to be very hard. But the third reason I think is the most compelling, and that reason is quite simply that the reason of economics. The truth is that the biggest markets in the world are in this part of the world. Consumer China used to be the factory of the world. Today, China is the biggest marketplace in the world. So if you talk to any Western company, including companies like ours, you cannot afford to ignore China because it is where the consumer is. It is where the biggest market is. So how do you de-link yourself from your biggest market? And how do you move your production systems and supply chain away from your consumers and your customers? So I think the actual bifurcation is not easy. Where you will see some more bifurcation is in the tech space. But in the tech space, while it's not easy and it's inefficient, you can actually work your way through bifurcation. But this is not new. For the last decade, the Chinese have not let you use Google and Facebook and a whole bunch of Western apps in China. So you create your own set of circumstances in China. So all of us are used to that. When you go to China, we use different apps. When you go outside, we use different apps. That kind of bifurcation where you got to use two different kinds of apps and protocols will happen. However, underlying, if you look at the 5G protocols themselves, the Chinese have been very much part of developing the protocols and the standards. So the protocols and standards are not that much different. The use cases and apps, you might find a propagation of two. Now, I'm not saying that it's all going to be painless. All of these creates inefficiency. So I do think there'll be inefficiency. I do think for small countries like Southeast Asian countries and Singapore, and for companies like mine, we'll have to learn to dance between two elephants. And dancing between two elephants is neither pleasant nor easy. However, I think it can be done.
Okay, that's good news. At least not so negative. It's positive. Now, let's move on to the next direct topic. Is on the digitalization. I skipped certain the background, but I just want to zoom in into central bank's digital currency. I think People's Bank, the central bank of China, is already in the more than 6 to 7 years, and now they already tested retail as well as a bit of cross-border. And BOJ, Bank of Japan, they just announced that within the next 12 months, they're going to do a pilot, but I don't have any detail. So digital currency is coming. If you look at the services provided by banks, the foundation goods are money or currency. Now that the currency is going digital, just like remember not many years ago when photo moved into digital form from paper, Kodak went belly up. So could you share your view on how financial institutions and banks can react to this coming change? To you, please.
All right. So, Yong-Wah, first of all, let me try and demystify this whole digital currency. Everybody is getting into a big hype about digital currency. So, let me first make a couple of points. First is 99% of all money in the world is digital and has been digital for the last 50 years. When you transfer money from Hong Kong to Singapore, let me assure you, it goes digitally. It goes in bits and bytes. Nobody is actually getting on a plane with a suitcase and moving money from Hong Kong to Singapore, and nobody has done that for 100 years. So the bulk of money payments and transfers that happen around the world all happen in digital form. They move in bits and bytes, and so it's not magic. It's not something new that suddenly happened that now you're saying, oh, money is going to move around digitally. 99% moves digitally. Physical fiat money, currency, notes, and coins represent less than 1% of total monetary aggregates and transactions in any part of the world. So let's just start to figure out what we're talking about here. It's not big. Second, even that 1% or 2%, which is the cash economy, the currency, notes, and coins economy, if you look at what's happened in China in the last 5-7 years, that has already disappeared. The central bank didn't do it, but Alibaba and WeChat did it. And therefore, if you have to look at the parallel, you should say, with the disappearance of notes and coins. And by the way, it's been happening all over the world for the last 40 years with plastic. Plastic took the first bite out of notes and coins. And then in the last 5 years, the QR code took the rest of the bite out of notes and coins. But when you think back and say, what change did it make to economies and financial systems? The fact that Alibaba did QR code in China, did that fundamentally change the nature of the financial system? I would argue, no, it just changes the way of the medium of exchange and the way this thing happens. So it's not in macro terms, macroeconomic terms, these are not such profound changes that the whole world is going to sort of distort and come to an end. Now, so I want to set the stage that now there are some things that could change, and those things are relevant and important. So the first is, I do think even in the global cross-border space, while everything moves digitally, the settlement process is clunky because we go through hub and spoke arrangements, we go through correspondent bank systems, and as a consequence, even though my digital payment and instruction advice, when I pay you, Yong-Wah, it would go instantly, from my computer or my phone to your phone. By the time the money physically gets credited to your account, it could take 2 days. And that's only because I have to pay my correspondent bank, which is JP Morgan. They will pay your correspondent bank, who's probably Citibank, and then they will probably finally pay you in your account. Now, by actually converting to a crypto process, you can actually change the settlement system. And so you can get a lot more efficiency in settlement, and the money can physically move at the same time as the instruction moves. When you do that, you can get a lot of efficiency in attendance systems. So the security settlement today, if I buy a stock or buy an exchange, the process at which the equity changes hands is very different from when the money changes hands. A crypto process can bring all of that and harmonize that in real time. Similarly, in the foreign exchange markets, you can get what's called a PVP, a payment versus payment in real time. So a crypto process can change all of these things. In fact, actually, just last week, we at DBS announced a partnership with JP Morgan and Temasek. We launched a technology company called Partior, which is trying to create a network of global players who uses this crypto process. We're going to use a digital Sing dollar, a digital US dollar. We're not creating a new currency. We're just going to digitize fiat currency to be able to maximize the value of the settlement efficiencies. So, but I think those changes will come without a doubt. The second thing, though, is
sorry.
In the retail space. Now, in the retail space, what you will find is that as the central bank, like the PBOC, they want to issue their own digital currency. That digital currency theoretically will compete with Alibaba and compete with WeChat. So people have a choice. If I want to pay each other, do I use the QR code of Alibaba or do I use the QR code of the PBOC? Now, what is the risk? If at some stage the central bank decides that only my currency should work in a country, and they shut down all other digital currencies and say only the central bank's currency will be relevant and available, that could happen. A lot of central banks have considered this, but it comes with some risk. Ravi Menon at MAS made a speech about a year or 2 years ago highlighting some of these risks, which is why a lot of central banks are very cautious about going that way. What happens if you go that means that every citizen in the country will eventually open an account with the central bank. And if every citizen opens an account with the central bank, then it starts calling into question the very need to have a banking system. And central banks are very wary of trying to disintermediate the banking system entirely. There are two challenges. One is that if you have a run on the banks, everybody will move to the central bank account. You will start finding much more greater weakness in the banking system. The other risk is the question of credit creation. So who creates credit? Today, banks' job is to do lending. We create credit. Tomorrow, if you eliminate the banking system, then the onus for credit creation now rests squarely on the shoulders of the central bank. The central banks don't want to create credit because of the political dimensions as well as the capacity dimensions of doing that. So I do think that while you see more central bank digital currencies, the central banks are going to be quite careful to not get to a stage where they create a monopoly situation and they eliminate any other form of currency because there's some risk attached to those. I do think central banks will continue to experiment though. So as you said, PBOC is running an experiment right now with Bank of Thailand, with HKMA, with I think BIS and one other bank, I forget, to try and figure how you could use the Chinese e-yuan internationally for retail and cross-border payments. We are hoping that we might be able to do that as well. So I do think you'll see some changes. I think you'll see some greater efficiencies. But I think many of these currencies will coexist with private currencies. And I certainly don't see a structural complete shift in the nature of the financial architecture on the back of this.
Okay, thank you. In fact, you just mentioned the projects we are undertaking together with Bank of Thailand, People's Bank of China, as well as one of the country in the Middle East. Basically,
UAE, right? Correct.
Yeah, UAE. So basically, it's on the we call it ECNY, the Chinese digital currency. Now, let's move into another direct topic. Virtual bank or digital banks in Singapore. Now, Hong Kong has 8 virtual bank license issued and all in operation. 2 weeks ago, the report came out and published in the newspaper. So far, they are not making money. That's one point. Second is Singapore has 2+2 digital license issued. Now, just for your information, the first digital virtual bank license is the Shenzhen called WeBank. Started to provide financial inclusion services a few years ago, and they are making money. And they recorded about 250 million individual customers and 1.7 million corporate customers. Now, most mind-boggling is at peak, they can handle more than 750 million financial transactions per day, and half of their employees are engineers, no accountants. Okay, half. I'm saying that. So just now you did mention that you offer services, electronically, whether to mates or whatsoever, doing the money transfer between Indonesia, Singapore. Now, can you share with us, traditional bank, how to compete with these virtual banks or digital banks?
Yeah. So, Yong-Wah, I guess I've gone on record. First of all kinds of competition we respect because every competitor brings their own strengths. But I want to make 3 points. Number one is that technology is freely available. There is nothing which says that WeChat or Ali or Amazon or Facebook has access to technology which somebody else can't get. In fact, today with open source technology, anybody can leverage technology. So the question is, do you have the culture and the capacity to also use the same technology to create the same kind of value propositions? And I would like to suggest that the banks which have been ahead of the curve doing that have ability to create much the same kinds of products and solutions that the virtual banks do. In our own case, as you know, DBS has been named the world's best digital bank twice in the last few years. We've also been named the world's best bank. And some of that comes from the recognition that the digital agenda that we've embraced in the last 7-8 years has also been as pervasive as some of the tech companies. You talked about how many engineers they employ. It's interesting, few people know. We employ 9,000 engineers in DBS. It is twice as many as the number of bankers that we employ. We employ design people, we employ data scientists, we employ analytics, we employ programmers, we have every new type. So it is the biggest part of our company as well. I like to believe we are a technology company offering financial services. We are no different from any other tech company. The second is obviously because over the last 7-8 years, we've been working hard at this. We have also built an entire set of product suites, which certainly in Singapore, we think is very competitive. So in the domestic payment space, our PayLah product is between PayLah and PayNow. We cover every merchant and every payment category in pretty much real time. We have a cross-border payment product called Remit, which is like TransferWise. It's got the largest market share out of Singapore, and we can do instant transfers to several countries, including many global countries. We are a whole category on what we call democratized wealth. So exactly like Robinhood, we have retail availability or digi portfolio, AI assisted portfolio management, online equity trading. We have, and that's our fastest growing business in terms of wealth management and creation. We have a whole suite of products for SMEs. So it's not just us, by the way. Our two competitors in Singapore, both OCBC and UOB, are also very good. So the Singapore banks actually have done enough in terms of product capability and product suite, I think, to be able to hold their own. On the other side, there are a couple of other things that help. One, I do think there's some areas in which we're distinctive. We still enjoy a lot of trust. The Edelman Barometer of Trust, they just published their report yesterday. And they show that the trust in the banking system and financial services in Singapore is still extraordinarily high. It's well into the 70s, whereas the trust in digital players is actually only in the 40s and 50s. And by the way, anecdotally, I ask people, small money you're quite happy giving to a fintech. If it is $1 million, where do you want to keep it? Most people still prefer and trust the banking system. So we do have this thing around trust. We do believe that the understanding of risk management is something that distinguishes us. Today, we use all the same tools as the big tech does. We use big data, we use analytics, we use algorithms. But on top of that, we have the insight and intuition that comes from several decades of doing this business. And finally, the last thing, I do think that the regulatory landscape is changing. For a period of time, I thought that some of the big tech fin players, particularly in China, other countries as well, were able to benefit from regulatory arbitrage. I remember once having a conversation with the Chinese regulator about why Alibaba shouldn't be regulated. And they jokingly told me, first they were too small, now they're too big. Well, as we know what's happened in the last few months, once you get too big, then the regulators and the authorities start worrying about the systemic stability you could pose. And as a consequence, people have started trying to level the playing field. And I can see that in most countries, that the free window that a lot of the tech fins enjoyed is now beginning to come under scrutiny. Now, that doesn't mean that it'll go away, frankly, and we're quite happy. We welcome competition. We think innovation is good. But I think that arbitrage that existed might not continue to exist going out substantively into the future. So when you put all of these things together, I think the consumer will have a better sense of products. They will have great opportunities. In the long term, however, I think you'll find a mix of players which are quite different. You'll find some banks which have been able to transition and do well. You'll find some tech fin companies which have also been able to transition and do well. So it won't be one size fits all. But I do feel relatively confident that we have what it takes to compete.
Okay, that's a very interesting answer. I think the next topic is on green. So I think you have covered it, so I will skip that. And perhaps we can now move into a Q&A. The Singapore Global Network provided me with a list of questions when participants are doing the registration, of which many more or less is answer.
Yeah, I saw the list too, so I tried to address some of those questions which were the pre-questions in my comments.
Okay, thank you. Now, some of the questions say job opportunity in Singapore, advice on how to return back to Singapore. I suggest that whoever raised this question contact Singapore Global Network for that, and I'm sure the Singapore Global Network will provide you with the right answers and even direct or connect you to the right party. However, I noted that there are 3 questions on Hong Kong, and perhaps I will try my best to address them. That shows that the participants are quite interested in the development in Hong Kong. Let me read out these 3 questions. What is the possibility of Chinese monetary authority taking over Hong Kong MA? And if so, what is the impact to the standing of Hong Kong as a financial hub of Asia? 2, what would be the changes to the monetary policy in Hong Kong after China's new policy? 3, what are the Hong Kong prospects as a financial hub? Let me answer on Piyush, if you think that you have something to say, please say later. Now, first, I can only guess the participants all over places. Let me address these 3 linked questions. First is that in this book called Hong Kong's Basic Law, now Article 110 and Article 111 stated very clearly the Hong Kong dollar as the legal tender of the Hong Kong SAR shall continue to circulate. This is Article 111. You can just download the Basic Law and check. The next one, the SAR shall, at its own, formulate monetary and financial policy, safeguard the free operation of financial businesses and financial market, and regulate and supervise them in accordance with law. By the way, Basic Law is 50 years, from 1997 to 2047. In other words, for the next 20 or so years, 26 years, Hong Kong dollar and Hong Kong MA will, by law, to remain. So this is the first answer. Next, for the monetary policy, we basically call it linked exchange rate system, or in layman term, Hong Kong dollar pegged to the US dollar. And the operation side is called convertibility undertaking, or CU as the market terminology. Let me quote a profound statement to explain if adjustment is needed. Now, this statement says so. If a formula works, no need to change. If the order is not broken, no need to fix it. So the last question on the financial center, or you call it financial hub, I just call it international financial center. If you look at the current development, one can argue that in the coming years, Hong Kong will be powered by 2 financial center engines. First is the IFC, International Financial Center, will remain and will be enhanced. Another financial center, I call it Regional Financial Center, basically is the Greater Bay Area, GBA. And I just noted that not long ago, DBS invested a bank in Shenzhen, which is brilliant move. Now, if you think about it, 2 financial center, 2 engine, all right? With the deep interest, participant, if you have a deep interest, I would suggest you read up the official release of China's 14.5 planning document dated November 2020, which is just about 6 summers ago. Now, by the way, with the IFC and Regional Financial Center, there will be a firewall to ensure national safety and security. So financial services for the next few years in Hong Kong will be in great demand. So this is my answer to the 3 questions. All right. Now, next question is on cryptocurrency. Looks like a very interesting in crypto and crypto derivative, how Singapore and Hong Kong are going to play a role in this space, impact of a cryptocurrency to the world economy. Perhaps, Piyush, you can share your view on this.
Well, I think what we're already doing is letting cryptocurrencies trade. So when we announced our digital exchange in December, that exchange offers 3 sets of services, actually not different from Coinbase. On the one hand, it allows the capacity to be able to do ICOs and securities token offerings. We haven't done a securities token offering yet. I'm expecting to do something in this quarter, both in the fixed income space and the equity space. Eventually, we hope to be able to tokenize other kinds of assets as well. So I'm hoping to do a property tokenization also fairly soon. Independent from the digital exchange, we're also participating in creating something called a carbon exchange, where we can tokenize carbon credits. So all of these tokenized assets, I think, will be one slew of activity that we'll focus on, and we'll use our digital exchange to do that. The second service we offer is the capacity to be able to trade cryptos. So we offer this thing for Ethereum, we offer it for Bitcoin, we offer it for Ripple. So 3 or 4 crypto coins in 4 currencies. It's been 3 months and it's actually working quite well. So the total volume of trading is picking up. We are careful because we're only offering it for accredited investors and affluent individuals. We've not taken it to the mass market, so you don't have the same scale. But we're trying to be conscious because our positioning is that, as a regulated entity, we just want to make sure we seem to be solid and kosher and not a cowboy kind of exchange. The third service that we've created is a digital custody service, which is actually held inside the bank. It's not in the exchange, it's held inside the bank. It's tightly coupled with a hot and cold wallet into the exchange. And again, so far, the early news is good because a lot of many other exchanges, third-party exchanges, are reaching out to us for our custody services. Now, the underlying demand I'm seeing, therefore, for ownership of these crypto coins and to trade them on an exchange is positive and gives me reason to believe this will continue to be an interesting asset class. The question, attendant question is, will this become money? And I sort of alluded to it in my last comments. If you think about the nature of money, it serves 3 functions. It's a unit of account, it's a medium of exchange, and it's a store of value. At this point in time, it's very hard for these crypto coins to be units of account and mediums of exchange. Units of account because there's just so much volatility in the value. The value goes up 20% up and down every day. It's hard to get a standardized unit of account. As a medium of exchange, I thought it was very hard till Elon Musk said that he's willing to accept it for cars. So maybe it starts becoming a medium of exchange. But again, the volatility inherent in the currency makes it hard for it to be a medium of exchange. Where it will get traction is as a store of value. And because quite clearly, whether it's Bitcoin or Ethereum in recent times, people are seeing these as an equivalent of gold. So just as gold might not have inherent value, but it has perceived value because we collectively have built a story saying gold is valuable. Now, could you replicate the same story against a crypto saying, hey, we collectively agree that this crypto is valuable and it's a finite resource, 22 million will be mined or whatever it is? I think that could happen. In fact, I think that is happening, which is why you can see that many of these crypto coins and crypto assets are beginning to increase value. The related question, which is even harder for me to answer, is the question of NFTs, non-fungible tokens. And how do you make sure that there's value there? My first personal reaction to that was, why would somebody pay a lot of money to a token which essentially says you have a right to somebody's first tweet or the right to some digital piece of work when everybody in the internet can see it anyway? So what is it that you're actually owning? But when you step back and figure, people do pay a lot of money for paintings. You buy a painting from Picasso and then you let people hang it in a public museum. So everybody comes and sees the painting. Nevertheless, you're willing to pay hundreds of millions of dollars just to be able to say, this is mine. So how does human psychology evolve where people say the willingness or the right to say, this is mine, I own the first tweet or the first baseball and I'm willing to pay value for it? It could well come to pass. I think some of these things are not known today. I think it's an evolution of human psychology and behavior over time.
Okay, thank you. The next question, this because at the moment there are 2 big topics. It's called digitalization and climate change, and I think even in Hong Kong we are really short of skilled people. So on the topic of how to upskill or even reskill staff within an organization, could you share with us, any strategy on this topic? Because I think the online question also got this question similar. Thank you.
So, Yong-Wah, first of all, it's not easy. It's very hard. Let's start with that. And I think both the areas, particularly climate and sustainability, there is even less availability of talent today than there is in the digital side. In the digital side, people have been working on it for some time. But even with the digital side, if you look at blockchain, if you look at distributed ledger, DeFi, you look at AI and ML, there is a dearth of talent. And on the sustainability agenda, if you look at people who really understand, how to do standard setting, measurement, verification, different approaches for impact measurement, impact accounting, etc., there's a dearth of talent. So I start with that basic premise that if any of you on this call have any talent or you are willing to put yourself through a reskilling or go and attend a program or a course, there will be tons of jobs available in the future. That's one. Now, second, how do you reskill people? It's a big thing on my mind because it is going to be a serious challenge. In DBS in 2016, we identified 1,600 jobs which would disappear by 2020. These included frontline teller jobs and included people in our call centers. And we started a program of reskilling. And we found very early that the heart of the program has to be learning by doing. Adults learn by doing. So you have to create an environment where people can get their hands dirty and you help people to reskill by doing in different ways. You've also got to focus very hard on killing the risk and experimentation. That's the only way people learn. Over 4 years, we were actually quite successful. We were able to, about 400 people left. We were able to reskill 1,200 people, of whom 800 odd people have been replaced and moved into new roles. And the new roles that got created because of the digital economy that is coming on us. Going forward, we need to reskill 7,000 people now between 2021 and 2024. And so we've created specific programs which allow people to say, okay, what is your current skill set? We've created AI and ML tools to say what are adjacencies that you could be reskilled for based on your inherent skills, not your job title or job description. So for example, if you're a teller, the deep nature of the skills you have, which is interfacing with customers or this thing, how do we translate those skills into other adjacencies? And then how do we give you the top-up training that you require to be able to move into a new domain? That's how we're addressing the skill agenda. There's some areas where we need a lot of external help and we work with providers. That is, sustainability is one. We're actively working with both the universities in Singapore, NUS, SMU, NTU, to create new tertiary education programs, centers for green, centers for sustainability, because it does require academic rigor as well, which we're not able to do within the country. So we are working a lot within the company. So we're working actively with tertiary education institutions also to create the appropriate skill development programs that we might need.
Yes, that's interesting. Okay, I will now just maybe pick one or two online question. One of it, just would like to ask DBS, your bank, that what happened? What happened to all the branches and ATM with the electronic banking, digital bankings are coming in? Do you have any plan?
So, Yong-Wah, if you look at the trends around the world, particularly in Scandinavia, it's quite clear that branches have been shutting down. In Netherlands, they're down to only 30% of the branches they had at the peak. And in some countries like Sweden, actually the parliament has had to put a commission to say we cannot eliminate cash entirely. There must still be 5-10% of cash. So, I mean, it's reached that extreme. So I think directionally the trend is happening. In Singapore in the last 5 years, if you look at our branch footfall, it reduces by 8 to 10% a year. If you look at the actual cash withdrawal from ATMs in Singapore, that's coming down by 7% a year. If you look at the actual people depositing cash in the branch systems in Singapore, us and the other banks, that's coming down by 5-6% a year. So the reality is that consumers are voting with their feet. They want branches less. People do more and more digital banking. People are quite happy to work from their home. Now, having said that, we also believe, particularly for us, that we have a responsibility as the public bank, as the bank for the heartland, as the bank for the masses, to make sure that we are cognizant of the needs of the elderly, of the less capable, of everybody else. And so we are being very cautious and thoughtful about how we modify and change our distribution footprint. So what we do is we try to modernize the branch. We move to a more digital branch. And then the digital branch, we put ambassadors. So if an elderly person comes, by the digital branch by its nature is 24/7. So that creates convenience. You can come in the morning. You don't have to wait for the branch to open. You can come in at night. And we put ambassadors there who can handhold the elderly or handhold the disadvantaged and show them how they can use the various digital technologies. In many of these branches, if you know how to do, we teach you how to press a button. And then you talk to a human being exactly like we're talking right now on virtual or Zoom. So they can help you and guide you with your stuff. We're helping put in the right machines in the branch so you can get your passbook updated, you can get a token, you can get a credit card, all the machine will pop it out to you. But you don't know how to do this if suddenly somebody doesn't show you. So we have a whole set of ambassadors who help you with this transition.
Yes, that's a good answer. Now, there's one question, I think the online question, I suppose because of today, there are maybe 10 to 15% of graduates overseas, Singaporean graduates overseas studying. They are concerned because with the advancement in the technology, some of those entry-level jobs could be automated, and then all these fresh graduates very worried. They need necessary experience to even join the workforce. Do you have any advice for the fresh graduate thinking of coming back to Singapore?
I think there is no dearth of jobs, especially in our industry. In the last decade that I've been running DBS, we've gone from 15,000 people to 34,000 people. Every year we only add people. Last year we added 2,000 new jobs just for graduates, for new people. Partly that was, of course, we thought it was the socially responsible thing to do in the face of the pandemic. But we are constantly creating new jobs. And the new jobs are quite diverse. It's not just STEM jobs. It's not just for the techies or people who know engineering. We have people, and we're creating jobs as service ambassadors. We're creating jobs as designers. We're creating jobs as anthropological people to be able to understand human behavior. So we're creating a whole diverse range of new jobs. As I said, we're going into the green space. So we're looking for people who understand green, who understand climate. So there is no question that some jobs are disappearing. Those jobs tend to be the road jobs, the manual jobs, the paper pushing jobs, etc. But side by side, new jobs are being created as well. One of the other things that's happening, I mean, it's not necessarily always good news, but the reality is in most countries, there is a much greater desire to look after citizens and to look after local talent. And therefore, if you're a Singaporean overseas, this is even a second thing that goes in your favor, that increasingly people are trying to see how you can help the Singaporean core. So that's also somewhat helpful.
Okay, thank you. I think right now is 6:37. Probably I will just pick up one question. Not that easy to answer question is Piyush. People are looking at the current moment. The environment is not that simple. The question is how to make money in the current environment. Any advice?
Well, I think there are two or three things which you got to take a view on. First of all, I still believe strongly in a diversified portfolio. So our CIO talks about a barbell strategy and to be at two ends of the spectrum. So there are two ends of the spectrum that I'd advise you to think about. One is the growth end. I'm convinced that if you take a secular view on the changes in technology that are happening around us, over time that will pay off. So the massive changes in biotech, the massive changes in AI, the massive changes in machine learning, the massive changes in the green economy, the biodegradable plastic. So this is what Cathy Wood does at R. And so, I mean, she's obviously got a lot of volatility now in her portfolio. But if you think through the underlying and say, what are changes you're seeing happening around the world? And how do you create a diversified portfolio to bet for the long term? Now, this portfolio, you've got to be willing to leave for the long term. If you need short-term liquidity, you shouldn't be there because this will be volatile. But if you have a 5-year view, I think all of these growth portfolios will pay off because the world is changing. On the other end of the barbell, my general view is that I think in the medium term, maybe not in the next 2-3 years, in the medium term, I do think a lot of the monetary stimulus and fiscal stimulus is likely to be inflationary. I think you're already beginning to see early signs of that in the supply side construct. Iron ore went through the roof recently. Copper has gone through the roof. A whole bunch of commodity prices are going up. But more structurally, you cannot create so much money without it having an inflationary impulse over time. So when things are inflationary, then you need to bet on real assets. And therefore, to me, having a portfolio of inflation-protected assets, but including some real assets, is not a bad thing. In my own personal portfolio, therefore, I put some gold, I put some cryptocurrency, I put some property, because these things are things that are naturally hedged against long-term inflationary trends. So that kind of barbell might not be a bad way to think.
Thank you very much. I think right now it's almost 6:40. Unfortunately, we cannot answer all the questions online and also during the registration. So perhaps I will now hand over the floor to Joanna to close this event, the webinar and seminar. Joanna, please.
Thank you so much, Yong-Wah. Thank you so much, Piyush, for your insightful sharing. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, due to time, we have come to the end of today's session. On behalf of the Singapore Global Network, we would like to thank our partners for their support for this event, our wonderful audiences who have taken time off your schedule to join us today, and last but not least, our esteemed speakers, Mr. Yong-Wah and Mr. Piyush, who have shared so much insightful perspectives with us today. Finally, just before we end, we would like to encourage everyone to take a minute to provide us your comments and feedback for this event so that we can improve and do better the next round. The QR code for the survey can be found on the screen here. And once again, thank you very much, everyone, for your active participation. And we look forward to seeing everyone again soon. Thank you very much. Have a great evening ahead.
All right, bye all.
Thank you.